And welcome back to the Hot Lap recording a bit late. It's the 28th of October, 1 in the morning. So practice here finished about an hour ago, but we are going to get into this. So coming up in the show, we're looking at our practice 1 and 2 results, the unique cooling upgrades for Mexico, teammate comparisons, and Lewis Hamilton comments on illegal cars. That's in reference to the United States Grand Prix. So let's get into this. So free practice, here we go. Here is Pirelli's outtake. Free practice 1, basically Verstappen, Albon, Perez, not a million miles away from each other. Especially, obviously, Max Verstappen and Albon were splitting those two Red Bulls at free practice 3. Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, once again, even closer, this time into the 118s. I like this. Pirelli, best time by compound in FP1. It was Fernando Alonso on the, I believe it was the hards, the C3s, Verstappen on the mediums, and obviously on the softs, looking good there. But interestingly, Oscar Piastri on the C4 prototype tyre. Yes, they had a prototype tyre. Best time by compound in FP2. Yes, Daniel Ricciardo is back. He was back in the USA, but he seems to be a lot more comfortable here. Verstappen again on those mediums and again on those softs, but Ricciardo again on the C4. There we go. Go, Danny. So let's get into the full rundown of practice 1 and practice 2. Shall we? We've got them here. I've zoomed in for you. So obviously Verstappen fastest in FP1. Albon less than a tenth off. Then Perez just 3/10 off Verstappen. He's looking pretty racy here. In at least an FP1 going out. Norris half a second down. Leclerc over half a second down. Piastri 7/10 down. Once again, not as fast as Norris like the USA, but it does seem that he's a bit more comfortable, at least in FP1. So we got Sainz 7th, Ricciardo in the top 10. Interestingly, they were talking about the free practice 1 and two things that Crofty said. One, this is the first time on track that we've had 3 Australians since, I think, the mid-70s. I can't remember the exact race. 76 or 77 Silverstone, maybe? But there we go. Ocon, 9th. Stroll in the top 10. Then we had Hamilton outside the top 10 in 11th. Hulkenberg in 12th. I mean, Hamilton, despite doing 25 laps, 1 second down, we know that's not going to be his true pace. So Mercedes obviously running something slightly different there. Zhou in 13th. Hulkenberg obviously 12th. Sargent 14th. And we have the FP1 rookies. The first of them with Behrman in 15th. Alonso 16th. Hadjar in 17th. Mick Doohan, the Australian, in 18th. The third Australian. Vesti in 19th. And poor Pourchaire didn't really get a lap, and he did 4 laps, and there was something wrong with the car, which is a massive shame. For Pourchaire. But let's get into FP2, which is a lot more representative. Let's say it was quite late. I think it started 11 o'clock UK time, which is a bit, whoa. But anyway, let's get into it. So Verstappen, once again, fastest by a tiny bit more than a tenth this time, but not much. But it was Norris, so you kind of feel more representative there. No Albon in the top 3 this time, and Leclerc 2.5 tenths off, just over. Once again, Ferrari last year were good, but it was tyres that really let them down, and engine modes, because if you remember, it's high up. But we'll get into those upgrades in a bit. Bottas in 4th. I know, Bottas in 4th. Oh, look at that. Less than 3/10 behind Verstappen. Perez, I think he does need to improve a bit. He's 5th. It's his home race, 3/10 behind Verstappen. Say, for example, that was qualifying, it'd be disappointing for a lot of people. Massively disappointing for Perez. And Danny Rick in 6th. And, I mean, if you want to compare the two, he is, a few hundredths off Sergio Perez. Slightly concerning if I was Perez, albeit, yes, let's not get carried away. It is practice. So Hamilton in 7th, just, shy of 3.5 tenths, 0.338 off. Ocon in 8th, nearly 4 tenths off. Piastri in 9th, over 4 tenths off. We're looking at, nearly 5 tenths if you round it up. So compared to Norris, who was 2nd, he's a bit more of a gap off there than FP1. So I think some improvement needed. Russell, just a couple of tenths off, 2 tenths off Hamilton. It kind of feels a bit like USA, where Russell was a tiny bit not out of sorts, but definitely slower than Hamilton. And you thought, come qualifying, will he be able to challenge? And he did get close in the United States, albeit not in the race necessarily, but definitely in that qualifying session. Sainz, again, kind of like with Leclerc, out of sorts. I mean, let's look. Yeah, he's 2.5 tenths off, and Sainz nearly what, 3 tenths off his teammate, which is, they've been, I can't ever feel they've been closer. Sonoda, nearly 3 tenths off Daniel Ricciardo's time in 12th. Feeling the pressure there, maybe. Zhou in 13th. Albon, the guy who finished second, is that a more representative time in 14th? Williams weren't expecting to go too well here, I think, according to their team. But within 8 tenths of the fastest, Hulkenberg 15th, Gasly 16th. Sargent, not the slowest, he's 17th, 1.2 seconds off though. Gasly within a second of Verstappen just. Lance Stroll, really disappointing for Aston Martin, if I'm honest, because Lance Stroll and Alonso really, really slow, albeit it was raining in FP2 kind of near the beginning and towards the end, which may have made the times interesting. And to be fair to Stroll, they were really, it was a bit, if anyone saw that Monaco Grand Prix where Bottas, the longest pit stop ever, where they just couldn't get the tyre off Bottas, it seemed to have happened to Lance Stroll because they really were struggling to get a tyre off, but he came out in the end and did sometimes. Magnussen in 19th, nearly 1.5 seconds off, 1.426. But the biggest surprise, Fernando Alonso, 1.740 seconds off. Has this honeymoon finished? It's going to be interesting to see Fernando Alonso and how he feels with those practice times. So over at the race, they've got, obviously this is the FP2. This is the FP2 rundown. But over at the race, they've got something quite interesting, I thought. When we keep scrolling down, all that happened in FP2, that's the final order. Verstappen tops FP2, fastest driver in each sector in FP2. Sector 1, interestingly, was Nico Hulkenberg. Sector 2 was Verstappen. Sector 3 was Hamilton. What's nice about that, it's not all Red Bull, it's not Verstappen. And interestingly, very much so, 3 different engines as well. Bear in mind, this the altitude here, for example, can have issues with those engines. And here we go. This is what I kind of advertised at the beginning. The top 5 teams. We've got Red Bull, and the difference between Red Bull and Perez about 3 tenths. Hamilton and Russell about 2 tenths. Leclerc and Sainz 3 tenths. Norris and Piastri about just shy of 3 tenths. And Lance Stroll and Alonso just 3.5 tenths, which is interesting. The gap between teammates, the biggest one being Stroll and Alonso. And then it was Leclerc and Sainz, which is a surprise. And then Verstappen and Perez, which is not the biggest surprise, but it's Hamilton and George Russell, obviously being the closest between the two there. So let's get into the upgrades. The upgrades for the cooling and how the cars have adapted them. This is from motorsport.com by Philippe Claren. As you can see here, you can almost see like the shark gills, and they're quite wide there on the Red Bull to help cooling because of the elevation. So as we know, or you might not know, but it says here, Mexico is quite high. It's located 2,200 meters above, I'm assuming that's above sea level, and it's notorious for its huge cooling demands to offset the reduced air density. Now, while the temperatures in Mexico, they hover around 25 degrees C, it's much cooler than the past couple of races. It's 20% reduction of air density means there's less air to cool the engine, brakes, and other key items. If you think of a lot of athletes that live really, really high up, there's not, for example, as much air, as much oxygen for them to breathe in. So there, you could argue there's an advantage there because their body gets used to having less. So when they drop down to like nearer sea level, they sometimes are a lot better. I digress. So it means that almost every team has introduced new parts that are exclusively designed to offer the most extreme cooling solutions. Running down the list, Red Bull has enlarged its forward-facing cooling loops on the side pod's right-hand side. That's interesting. Ferrari has bought a new engine cover with bigger loops. They're those shark gills I was telling you about. But the team has decided to cover its cooling needs with its existing engine cover, as it's anticipated the weekend to be hotter than it now should be. Should its current engine cover not be sufficient at all, it could install a new example. So Leclerc said on Thursday that Ferrari have a very different package, which he expected should be better than last year, where they finished 5th and 6th. And as you can see here, the loops, or I like to call shark gills, because they really do look like shark gills. much wider than we've seen. Unfortunately, I don't really have a comparison, but it would be interesting there. Alpine, they've it says here they've deployed a solution with bigger loops, which it had already tried out in practice in Qatar, and there you can see there, slightly different position than some of the other teams. It's really interesting, isn't it? How teams go about their cooling. McLaren also changed its engine cover geometry to drive more air through the radiators while introducing a bigger front brake duct just to keep those brake temperatures under control. Now, what is interesting with that is if because as we know the air is down, the brakes cool, as you can probably see when some cars come into pits. You see that brake smoking and you think, oh my gosh, they're going to catch fire. But then when they go again, it's the air that keeps them cool and stops them going on fire, so to speak. But then it was Verstappen that had an issue with his brakes in Austin. And I mentioned, surely they're not going to be, hardened brakes. And I don't think this circuit really is. But what I did forget to acknowledge was the fact that this circuit has, because it's so high up, will it then have potentially an issue with brake cooling? So AlphaTauri and Haas have followed suit with similar setups as McLaren. Williams has brought a redesigned engine cover that features a bigger centerline exit, similar to Alpine. I'm assuming the centerline exit is here when you look on the top of the car where the green, white, and red is, the Mexican flag-esque they've got there. And Alfa Romeo stuck to a new rear brake duct, while Mercedes and Aston Martin did not introduce any previously unused parts. There we go. So, last news story, but very much not least. No, it's not the Lego Duplo. It's Hamilton. He doubles down over claims of a lot of other cars were illegal in Austin. This is from Planet F1 by Michelle Foster. So, disqualified from the US Grand Prix, along with Leclerc. Yeah, we've said that about 1 million times now. You've probably read that equally as much, nearly. But Hamilton has said a lot of other cars were illegal. As we know, 4 cars were chosen. 50% of them were illegal, and it was down to their planks, which we've reported on, kind of repeated a week. So Hamilton believes that other cars were also illegal. But what baffled a pundit is, if the FIA found 50% of the cars tested to be in breach of the regulations, why weren't other cars tested? According to Hamilton, a fair number of them would have been illegal. He said, I've heard from several different sources that there were a lot of other cars that were also illegal, he told the media in the build-up to the Mexican Grand Prix. But they weren't tested, so they got away with it. He said, I've been racing here 16 years. There have been times where there's been many other scenarios like this where people got away with certain things, and some people have just been unlucky. They got tested. So I think ultimately there probably needs to be some sort of better structure in terms of making sure it's fair and even across the board. The FIA have come out, I don't know if it was before or after this, but Formula One have come out and said, no, we're happy with the way that we test. And they've intimated that, well, they basically said that they don't have enough people to test all cars, which I kind of understand. However, you've got to wonder if this issue arises anymore or keeps arising, you've got to start to think, okay, maybe we need a better way to do this. Maybe we need a better way to test these parts. But there we go. That is your FP1 rundown. This has been the Hot Lap. We will speak to you next time after qualifying. But okay, well, before we go, who's going to get pole? It's probably going to be Verstappen, isn't it? It's going to be Verstappen. Wouldn't it be lovely if it was Perez at his home? Mexico would go crazy. You heard every time that Perez went through the stadium, the big roar of the Mexican crowd. But alas, it's more than likely going to be Verstappen. Who's going to be alongside him, though, is more of a question mark. I mean, it could be Ferrari or McLaren or Mercedes. Mercedes seem to be the slowest at the moment in the practice, but they don't normally show... I can't help but feel they don't always show their true colours on the Friday. And overnight, they seem to quite often improve quite a lot, and especially with this new package. So it's going to be interesting, but I have no idea who's going to be alongside Max. I'm assuming that Max is favourite to get pole because he's been fastest in the first 2 sessions. So it's a long run down to turn 1 though. So Sunday could be interesting even if he is on pole. But let's just hope for an exciting qualifying. It was very exciting, wasn't it, in the USA and Qatar? And let's hope for an exciting race. But this has been the Hot Lap. Like and subscribe if you can. It's absolutely amazing if you do. You make a guy like me smile. Comment. I try and answer all comments as I said. And thank you very much for giving me the time to talk to you about Formula One, which I love, and I'm assuming you do, especially if you've got this far. We'll speak to you next time.